The manager of security engineering at Controlscan, and the talk is password security in the PCI DSS.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Jared White. Today I will be talking about passwords as they relate to the PCI DSS. Okay, nobody bolted for the door. So as you guys know, PCI DSS is an extremely exciting topic. So I will do my best to make it as interesting as possible. Primarily want to talk about sort of where the PCI DSS has been and where it's going in terms of passwords. What's that? Oh yeah, we'll be getting into 3 for sure. For sure. I cannot change the slide. Yeah, that worked. You know what? It's changing it in presenter mode for some reason, but not.
I like it. They're called demo guns. They're really nice. But give it. Let's try now. There we go.
There we go. Awesome. Thank you. So just a real brief background about myself. I've been in security engineering and consulting for a little over 10 years, primarily offensive security. I currently lead the security engineering services team at Controlscan, which is a small Atlanta-based compliance and security firm. And we specialize in penetration testing, application testing, social engineering, and general risk assessments. And then here are a couple things that I do in my spare time, Sandsman, for certifications. And I'm originally from Louisiana. This is extremely important. If anyone knows anyone from Louisiana, you will know that they always take every opportunity they can to mention that they are, in fact, from Louisiana. So here's my obligatory Louisiana shout-out. So, PCI DSS, has it been a success or a failure? Well, it's hard to say. Like with most regulatory frameworks or guidance frameworks, it's really difficult to quantify whether or not it's been successful. I will say that PCI DSS has succeeded in bringing security concepts to smaller businesses. So specifically in my company, we deal with a lot of smaller businesses. We deal with businesses that complete SAQs as part of their attestation process, which means that's a very scaled down reporting requirement that you have to fulfill in order to demonstrate compliance. What that means is you routinely end up with a lot of organizations that don't have to spend for security and really don't have the know-how or the aptitude to implement security controls. But it has at least brought some awareness to these smaller organizations about security concepts. And despite its implementation, there is no slowing of breaches. There probably never will be. Interestingly enough, what we hear about a lot, and actually it isn't intended on there. You hear a lot about breaches in retail environments, right? So, I mean, Target obviously is a big one that recently occurred a couple of years ago. There's TJX, right, back in 2006. That was more than a couple of years ago. But one thing that we see is that service providers are becoming increasingly targeted by criminals. And of course, there is this whole section of guidance within the PCI DSS that relates specifically to service providers. You're a service provider if you provide any service to an organization that must be compliant, and you can impact the security of the payment chain in some way. An internet service provider, not a service provider. Logarithm, on the other hand, if you were using a hosted solution, a managed solution, something like that, that would be a service provider. As you all know, in the Target breach, that was purportedly the way the bad guys came in, was through a service provider that had always-on access into the Target network. I've not seen any of that information myself, so it's pretty speculative, but I think that's the consensus at this point, that that's how that occurred. And there's something that I thought would be interesting to throw in, is that under the current PCI DSS requirements, password 1 is an acceptable password, which we all know is extremely secure. Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. It would technically not be allowed, but if you set up Active Directory to require complex passwords, that'll be approved. But at any rate, I thought this was a really interesting pie chart, and you'll see a lot of those passwords here. This came out recently. This was from the @BRT. I don't know how you say that, @BART or @BRT POS malware that's been going around. And these are some of the top passwords that came out of it. And I think these are white. Sorry? Nah, so we'll get there. What's that? That's exactly it. That's exactly it. NCR, National Cash Registers, operates a point-of-sale system called Aloha POS. And so as you can see, almost like, I don't even know how to do it, 12, like a dozen Aloha passwords here. I see these in every, we call them QSR, quick serve restaurant environments. So Burger Kings, Chick-fil-A's, things like that. These are everywhere. They're everywhere. And then you'll see down here there's Micros, which some of you probably know is another POS terminal. So pretty good bet if it's the name of a POS terminal product or a payment product, there's a default password somewhere associated with it. I thought this was really interesting though, because when I first saw this, I thought, man, this is what we see basically every week in and out doing penetration tests in these environments. And then again, this is about Backoff, which is the newest new RAM scraper malware that's out there. And what it's doing is they're using the command and control server basically allows you to kind of custom build your own password list. But it comes built in with a lot of password lists that target these device manufacturers and these vendors. So Aloha, Micros, things like that. You see a lot of that stuff. And I believe they did specifically call out Aloha in some of the research that I saw on this. But it exploits crappy passwords. And then once it does that, it has a way into the network. And we'll talk about that. Why service providers, right? So they're generally small regional firms, right? So like in the Midwest region, you know, they work only the Midwest region or something like that. Or maybe they only work like a tri-state area, or maybe they only work like 2 cities within a state. Generally, these are small, break-fix IT shops that grew as their clients grew. And so what you find is that, you know, the big selling point is, hey, we can service your systems without having to come on site. And that's a big selling point for a lot of these organizations. And it makes sense because, you know, these people have business to run. These people have things to do on a daily basis. It doesn't involve security. And you know, that's unfortunate, but most of them don't even have their own internal IT teams. So this is a big selling point for these vendors to be able to get in and work on their computers and do all that kind of stuff after hours. There are also a variety of different implementations. We rarely see a store footprint that is the same across all locations. So a chain might have 155 stores. You got 155 different ways those stores are implemented. That's a bit of an exaggeration, but it really becomes an issue because now you've got a bunch of different ways of managing the same thing, but they're not consistent. So now you get into the process of, well, this one's RDP, this one's logged in, this one is just remote desktop and added to the internet. Believe it or not, we see that. And so now there are a ton of different ways in which they've got to connect into this network. And now they've got to remember all these different ways of connecting into this network. And what does that mean? People are lazy. People make crappy passwords. People do things that are easy in order to make their job easier. And then the other problem is that oftentimes they have inexperienced staff. So they have you know, technicians which are really not well versed in information security. They're not well versed in you know, APT. They're not well versed in remote access. You know, a lot of them are just sort of general break-fix people who know how to go in, pull out a board, plop in a new board. Hey, look, everything's good. Or image a hard drive and throw it back. You know, throw it back up, rebuild the computer. So, you know, I think that is a lot of the reason why service providers are being targeted, and I would look for them to become increasingly targeted, just because of all of these different factors here. So some of the things that the PCI DSS does for authentication and passwords, and those of you who are familiar with the DSS know all of this, but it explicitly specifies password parameters for admin/non-consumer users, and that's a very important key point for those of you who are familiar with the DSS. Non-consumer users, which means consumers, all of us, everyone who uses the service, can have crappy passwords. And in this case, even admins can have crappy passwords. Rotation and reuse requirements, which actually Bruce K. Marshall is giving a talk on right now in the other track. Changing the default credentials. Multi-factor authentication on remote connections originating from outside the cardholder data environment. And that can mean 2 LANs, or it can mean the internet. It really just depends. Requirements around storage and transmission, although not great requirements around storage and transmission. And requirements around password resets. So, as most of you know, the PCI DSS works on this sort of cyclical process for implementing new controls, testing those for a little bit, and then pushing out the requirements so that everybody has to adhere to them. I believe, and I as a QSA, I should probably know this, but at the end of this year, 3.0 will come in. Who asked me about 3.0? 3.0 will come in January 1, 2015, correct?
They got their user off.
Yeah. So 3.0 is coming. Everyone is going to have to deal with it. By the way, let me take a step back and just say, I hate the PCI DSS. I really do. I'm a QSA, so I kind of have to like it a little bit. It does pay the bills. I focus primarily on the pen testing side, but I'm not a fan of the PCI DSS. The PCI DSS is not going anywhere. It is not going to disappear. We cannot hate it out of existence. And some organizations have found a use for the PCI DSS. So, I'm not up here to kumbaya and tell you guys to embrace the PCI DSS and learn to love the bomb because you're never going to get away from it anyway. But that's basically what I'm telling you. That's true.
I mean, and point blank before the PCI DSS, they were scary. Are you kidding?
A lot of organizations are like that. And of course, that begs the question, then what about laws? What about statutes? What about data protection laws and things like that?
They'd have to start thinking about figures and smarter.
Well, I will again say that I am not a big fan of regulatory frameworks and all that kind of stuff. But that's a political track that I'm saving for some other time, and I don't want to get in on that one. But you're right, there would have to be a big fundamental sort of rethinking of the way that we all view, or the way that our government views technology. So, I want to talk a little bit about some of the changes from the PCI DSS, the current version of the PCI DSS, which is version 2.0, to the new version, which is 3.0. And overall, I think there were some positive changes. I think most of them are superficial, but I think there are some good advancements that point in the right direction. Well, also, there's a couple of slides on here also about PA DSS, which I am not super well versed in. Does anyone here ever, do PA DSS testing or auditing, anything like that? So there are some interesting requirements in the PA DSS that relate to authentication and passwords specifically, and I wanted to talk a little bit about some of those too. So here's the first one, 2.1. Everybody knows this is the change default passwords before deploying into production stuff. And the big thing I wanted to point out here is the emphasis on all, the caps here. And this really, of course, enhances compliance statistics among most organizations because, of course, when you capitalize anything, people take it seriously. So I think this is an interesting advancement. But really what I wanted to point out was this applies to all default passwords. This was a new requirement, okay? So they added the caps, but this little wording here, this verbiage, is a new portion of the 2.1 requirement. Previously, it did not say this applies to all default passwords. If you're in the QSA world and you're on site with people occasionally, which I have not been in years, but you get people fighting you over stuff like this. Like, well, technically that is not a cardholder data system, and actually you're authenticated. Okay, dude, I get it. Just change all of your passwords though. Seriously, change your default password before you put it in the environment. And